Yo, everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics. Joining me today is the artist of curse words and Image Comics, as well as the creator of God Hates Astronauts, which is returning with God Hates Astronauts Presents 3D Cowboys 2D Spectacular on Kickstarter. It's Ryan Browne. Thanks for coming on, Ryan.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So, we talked about this already before we started recording. You're mostly here to talk about the Kickstarter for God Hates Astronauts, which has a legion of unbelievable guest contributors, which we'll get to. But I wanted to start at the beginning of everything for God Hates Astronauts. For listeners that don't know, it's pretty insane. It's basically about a superhero team that sucks at being superheroes, but is excellent at being insane and getting into bizarre hijinks. I love it. It's ridiculous. But I have to ask, where did that come from? You go on Wikipedia and it describes it as satire, but I feel like that doesn't really even do it justice. Where does that come from in Ryan Browne's brain?
Well, the series started as a reaction to, I guess, failure. Outside art, I went to art school, and when I came out of it, I thought that I could be working professionally in comics very early, and it took a very, very long time for me to be able to do that. So I spent a ton of time trying to figure out what people wanted from me so that I could be hireable. So, I have piles and piles of Batman submissions, and I just drew comics that were just 5-page stories. They were penciled, never lettered, anything like that, just to try and get a job as a penciler. So I spent a good, 6 years of my life out of college just trying to figure out how I could get hired. Mm-hmm. And then I finally kind of hit this breaking point where I said, I want to make comics. That's what I've always wanted to do. So I'm just going to do it. And I'm going to stop trying to figure out a way to be commercial or to be hireable. So that's where God Hates Astronauts came from. So it really was just making myself laugh, drawing exactly what I wanted to draw, not worrying about it being pitchable, not worrying about it being commercial. And so just all the jokes that I had kind of been building up in my head and just combining it into some sort of story. And so when I did that, it didn't work. And it didn't work really, really hard. I put out the first book in 2007. And I brought it to publishers. I brought it to creators. A lot of people liked it, but everyone said it's unpublishable. And so that was that. And I shelved it. And then I spent many more years working at a graphic design job until the book had kind of found its own audience among other creators. All the copies that I had given out. I had given one to Derek Robertson and Sander Cannon and Chris Burnham. And, I started talking to people at shows, and they remembered me as the guy with the crazy comic. And people encouraged me to keep doing it, but do it as a webcomic. So that's when I just decided to go for it. And so I started making it a webcomic. I started self-publishing issues, still had a day job, wasn't making any money on the book, was pretty much losing money because I was having to print it. And so then eventually I built up this kind of fan base and this audience because I was kind of doing the sense of humor is kind of Adult Swim humor, which, worked really well at that time on TV, but didn't really exist in comics very much. Because it was still this time where, we still have this a lot, where the thought is that humor books do not sell. Right. And that people that read comics do not have a sense of humor. And, that's true for a demographic, but a certain type of reader that is, there for adventure, or superheroes or that kind of stuff. It took a while to find its audience because of that. And it was only through doing a Kickstarter for a collected hardcover of all the self-published stuff that it really started to get some attention, and that's when Image got involved and started publishing it.
So is that when you did the Kickstarter, was that really when you kind of realized that? I mean, because you probably heard from a lot of people and you knew that people were reading the webcomic and everything, but when you did the Kickstarter, you're probably like, oh, wow, actually, people are going to support this. People are interested enough in God Hates Astronauts to support this, like, financially. Like, I imagine that was an eye opener to a degree.
Oh yeah, I mean it was like I always say that it was the best thing I've ever done and the hardest thing I've ever done.
Mm-hmm.
Because the Kickstarter blew up pretty huge, and I like it was an incredible amount of work for me. And like I, had friends helping and stuff, but like I sent out 1,700 packages. Like it was crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Because I kind of hit Kickstarter when it was still decently popular for people to just be surfing it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I mean, it really put me on the map. It got me a lot of attention, and it got me the job. I took over for Riley Rossmo drawing Bedlam for Image, and that's when I started talking with Image. And I was also doing fill-ins for Nick Pitara on Manhattan projects at that time as well. So having that Kickstarter do so well for God Hates Astronauts kind of put me on the map with other creators, which is generally how I get most of my work, and not necessarily from editors.
Mm-hmm.
So
I do want to say I'm actually holding the hardcover. I back that and Blast Furnace. I mean, it is kind of interesting because it's like you were talking about how you weren't really finding your way when you were trying to be somebody else to a certain degree. It's like you aren't necessarily the person that they hire for Batman, but you are a person who, like, when you're doing your own thing, like, really, I mean, obviously you did Bedlam and Manhattan projects too, but it's like you had to almost like pursue your own voice to be able to, for people to recognize your talents in a way.
yeah, yeah, and then I haven't been working professionally. I mean, I've been working professionally full time for 6 years now, but the landscape has changed so drastically.
Yeah.
And those years out of college, you had to go to a comic show. There weren't nearly as many comic shows.
Mm-hmm.
And you had to hopefully get chosen for a portfolio review at Marvel or DC. Every once in a while, there'd be like Dark Horse there, and you could get a portfolio review from an editor. And then you'd have to do well enough in that review that you get an email address.
Mm-hmm.
And then you would hopefully they would respond to your emails, and like that was it. Like that was the only real way to make comics that people would see, because webcomics weren't really that big of a thing, and self-publishing was just like a money sink.
Mm-hmm.
So
the weird thing about webcomics though is like I feel like a lot of people read them, but it was hard to financially support anything with it.
yeah, and a lot of people have figured them out.
Yeah.
I never really wanted to make the type of, like, especially when webcomics had gotten really popular to begin with. The stuff that was really popular was strips,
Mm-hmm.
Something that you could email to your friend because you thought it was funny.
Like Penny Arcade.
Yeah, right, exactly. And then it would explode that way. Like people would share it for you. Obviously, it would go viral in its own way.
Mm-hmm.
But I always wanted to do like a long form narrative, and especially like early on, that was not of super, like that wouldn't go viral
Mm-hmm.
very easily. Now it's a whole different thing, and there's like I don't even know right now. The webcomics, sometimes a webcomic will pop up doing a Kickstarter and it will just explode, and it will be incredible. And it's like, man, I don't know anything about like this audience, and so there's all these comics about video games, and like I'm so out of that kind of scene. But certainly at the time that I was doing God Hates Astronauts as a webcomic, I never made any money off of it.
Mm-hmm.
And like at its best, when I post a new page, I get like 300 views, and that was like a huge victory for me.
Mm-hmm.
But that slowly made people be interested in buying the single issues at comic shows, and then eventually, when the Kickstarter rolled around, I don't know, it just kind of bizarrely worked out.
Yeah. I actually think that like webcomic Kickstarter combination is pretty deadly. It's like, in theory, build your audience on the webcomic and then do a Kickstarter for a print thing. And it's like, I mean, I like you said, there are like webcomics that raise like six figures in their Kickstarters, and it's kind of astonishing and it's fantastic. But it, like you said, the game has definitely changed since you first, brought God Hates Astronauts to life back in like 2007.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
So let's talk about the Kickstarter project itself. Like I said, it's God Hates Astronauts presents 3D Cowboys 2D Spectacular. It's an 80-page hardcover anthology with 12 stories from artists like James Herron, Greg Smallwood, Rob Guillory, Paolo Rivera, and more, with you writing the whole thing, right?
Yep.
So why did you want to get back to God Hates Astronauts in that sort of way? Like, you had published it at Image for a bit. Why do you want to go back to the Kickstarter route?
Well, doing it through Image, I'm currently doing a monthly book in curse words at Image. So, that monthly grind is extremely hard.
Right.
And when I did the 10 issues of God Hates Astronauts as a monthly book at Image, it became considerably less fun for me because it was so hard. I did 10 issues in a year. And then, I did a lot of design, I did color work on it, I did covers, and just like the deadlines never stopped. So it became a little less fun for me than I wanted it to be. And it became a lot more of a job, like a really hard, stressful job that you don't sleep well kind of thing. So then I decided that I did, like, if I was going to work on something at Image again, I wouldn't do it all myself. So that's when I started talking to Charles Soule about working on a book with him, because Charles is a guy like me that's super detail oriented and workaholic kind of guy. So someone to kind of share some of the burden of making a monthly book. So that's kind of like, that's why God Hates Astronauts had to end. Sales were okay, but like, I knew the people that were reading it really, really liked it. So I knew that I wanted to revisit it because it's, it's my baby. It's the thing I really like working on. It's still at this point is a decently difficult to sell and describe to people. So there's that, so it, I wanted to get back to my commercially non-successful book, like the book you can't pitch, the book that doesn't have an elevator pitch, and but it's super fun and the people that like it really, really like it. So that's when I started thinking about going back to Kickstarter. And Image is, the greatest publisher in the business, because you own the rights to your book. So it was my decision to stop doing it there, and they were going to support it if I wanted to keep going. And, it's kind of my decision to do it through Kickstarter the way I'm doing it. So that's kind of where we are.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like it's kind of perfect for you to kind of, if you have other projects going on that are maybe a little bit less stressful, like, you can do that, and then you can revisit God Hates Astronauts from time to time with all your friends and like have some fun with it. And like, instead of it being like this relentless job, you can actually just like have these little riffs on stories that are in this world and everything. It seems like that would, I mean, I'm sure it's still like work, but at the same time, it probably brings the joy back into it for you.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like, I do think that the third volume of God Hates Astronauts is the best comic I've ever made. So I really figured out what this series was about and what it needed to do. But it was grueling. I got really bad tendonitis in my forearm and my elbow from working on that book, because it just was too intense. And so I drew those last couple of issues in total pain the entire time, which is kind of crazy. But now it's just it's work in the sense that it takes time and it takes a lot of thought, but I'm having a ton of fun and writing all the scripts for people. I asked every artist that was my dream get that I knew, and every single person said yes. which was really surprising. And in fact, enough people said yes that I'm hoping I can do a second one.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of incredible. Like everyone said yes to all this stuff, and I've gotten over and over again from the artists when they turn in their work that it's the most fun they've had doing a comic in a long time, because it's just silly and weird. And I write in a way that you don't have to draw anything you don't want to draw, kind of thing. So I don't have like I'm not writing a boardroom meeting that takes 6 pages,
Right.
So
Or just relentless crowd scenes.
right, exactly. Yeah. So in that sense, it's been great. Like it's been really, really awesome. And I started in October, and all the art has been turned in. And like I'm a real stickler for if I have a Kickstarter, I don't want anyone to feel like they're taking a huge risk with me.
Mm-hmm.
And that since it's my project, I took the risk. I got all the people on board. I'm paying all the people, because they deserve to be paid for their work.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm taking all that risk. So it's pretty stressful leading up to the Kickstarter, because if it doesn't work, then like that's on me.
Right.
Which
all
I
the
think
pages
is the
are already
way.
done.
Yeah, it's all done. Everyone already turned it in. So I think that that's the way the Kickstarter should work. And a lot of people have failed spectacularly at making a comic on Kickstarter because they didn't do it that way. They did the other way, where you give me money for this book that I've drawn 8 pages of, and I'll finish my 120-page hardcover by this date. And it's comics, so everything in comics takes longer than everyone says it will, always. So, yeah. So for me, this was, it's weird to return to Kickstarter after being publishing through Image. I see them as almost two different crowds.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people buy books off Kickstarters, don't go to comic shops. So, but I mean, there's plenty of crossover, but so it's a different audience. And, the interesting thing about it is financially, it's a whole different situation, where I get these artists, to work on these stories for me. We started in October. Everyone's done their work, and then if it gets funded, when the second the Kickstarter ends, I get that money, and so then I can pay all of them. Versus if I did it with a publisher, you have to finish the book before you solicit it, and it solicits out several months, and then there's a whole book market that has returns, so you don't get money from the book market for months and months and months and months and months.
Right.
So, like financially, like that's one of the great things about Kickstarter is I can come up with an idea for a project, I can put in the risk of putting in the time, and then immediately, hopefully, get compensated for that time. Versus if I went with any other publisher, maybe we'd put the book out, we'd finish it, it'd come out 2 months later, and then no one would get paid for another 6-8 months,
Yeah.
So
yeah, you're really reliant on like the long tail working out, because it's like sometimes people are starting creator-owned books, for example, like a year plus ahead of time, so they're working on that stuff for a very long time without getting paid for any of their work, and like that's kind of an astonishing thing. I do think that your route of having all of the work done and everything that's such a feather in your cap for like kind of, I hate to break it down to like, very capitalistic terms, but the fact that you can say this is done and I can get this, like, we will just be printing it after this is done and yada, 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 and it'll be fulfilled. And like, this is a done thing versus like you were saying, like I've backed Kickstarters where, I mean, I honestly think there's probably ones that I backed in like 2015 that I still haven't got anything from. And I don't hold any ill will, because I like one time I talked with a creator who was going through some stuff related to it. And I was just like, I'm investing in you. And if it doesn't pan out, I'm still glad I supported you. But at the same time, it's like sometimes it turns into vaporware, and that's just the reality of it. And like
right.
I think you having all the pages done is, like I said, a huge feather in your cap.
Yeah. And I want to do this again, and if I screw you on it, even if I, becomes a negative experience because it's months and months late, like, why would you trust me again? Like this is Kickstarter is so trust based.
Yeah.
Like, here's what I say I'm going to do. and then here's when I'm going to deliver it, and you have to trust me with your money. So like with this current Kickstarter, I have like a ton of art. I didn't want to spoil a ton, but I have a ton of art built into the page, so you can really see the amount of effort that's gone into it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so far so good.
I do want to talk about actually like the story process. Largely, I could try to explain the story. Largely, it's about 3D Cowboy went to jail for murdering the narrator of the book, Charles Soule, and he is now speaking to his son, 3D Millennial, about what exactly. What are the stories he's telling? He's trying to teach him how to be a storyteller, right? That's effectively what it is.
Yeah, it's a father-son story in its own way. Where it's visitation in a prison where 3D Cowboy's crappy son, 3D Millennial, is forced to go in and visit with his dad to learn the family art of storytelling.
Yeah.
And he's very reluctant to listen to his dumb old dad, and his dad kind of slowly tells him these stories and wins his son over through showing him how great telling stories can be.
Yeah.
So that was kind of my framework because I have to draw curse words monthly. I knew that I wasn't going to be able to draw this whole book, so I drew the 10 pages, which are the framework of 3D Cowboy and 3D Millennial's relationship, and then every story that 3D Cowboy tells is written by me and drawn by another artist. So there's this crazy variety of styles from mainstream guys to indie guys. And it's like all the stories are out of continuity. Several characters die in these stories that don't actually die. It's just kind of whatever,
He's teaching his son about unreliable narrators.
Yeah, there you go. At one point, 3D Millennial tells his own story.
Nice.
And it's terrible. So I've got a comic in there that's intentionally bad and broken.
How do you rope an artist in for that? How do you rope an artist in for that story?
Well, I don't know how I did it. I just assigned it to one. So I asked all these friends of mine who I know through comic shows, through working together. Some I've never worked together. I've never worked with, and I asked them all what characters they wanted to draw, what kind of story they wanted to draw, and then from that's how I determined what the stories were going to be about. And then I figured out small ways to kind of connect themes between the stories. So there's a stupid bit character in God Hates Astronauts that's named Count Stockula.
Nice.
And it's just a Dracula that's a stock boy at a grocery store. And it's just a throwaway pun. He's in one page of God Hates Astronauts, and 2 people asked to draw him. So there are now 2 stories about this character who isn't even a character.
Oh my God.
That I had to figure out. And so it's kind of interesting. And if I do a second book, if that ends up happening, depending on how this Kickstarter continues to go, I'm going to try and bring in some of the other characters that got kind of ignored in this storytelling. But it's all pretty fun. Like I wanted all the artists to have as much fun as possible, to draw exactly what they wanted to draw. Things were decently organic with me kind of blocking out stories and sending them to them and seeing if they liked it, and then fleshing it out. One of my stretch goals that hopefully if it gets funded and I get to stretch goal, I'd like to give everyone a PDF of the script, because the script is in itself really funny, with lots of bizarre jokes in it. And it's the first time that I've ever written an entire book all out ahead of time. So, yeah, it's kind of fun.
I was kind of curious, like, how different the process is writing for yourself versus writing everybody else, because it sounds like you very carefully kind of curated exactly what you were trying to do for the specific artist that you're working with. Like, you talked to them beforehand, but you know, on the original stuff, you were your own collaborator. So, like, when you were originally doing it, were you just kind of figuring things out on the page?
Yeah, always. Like I can think decently about jokes and like come up with jokes, when I'm in the shower or whatever. Or, lying in bed. That's when most people do their thinking. But when you sit down and you have to write a script, it can be pretty daunting. And I'm really bad at planning things. But if I just go and just start,
Mm-hmm.
I'm really pretty all right at the improv stuff. So most of the stuff is just, all right, here's the character this artist wants to draw. I'm just going to start and let's see what happens.
Yeah.
So that's how most of the scripts are done. So some of the stories, it feels like there's a point and there's a theme and a good like message to it that is at least understandable, and other ones are just a bunch of garbage. That's just kind of fun. Silly. Goofs and stuff. But like all of this, I last year I wrote a book for Dynamite called Project Superpowers Hero Killers.
Mm-hmm.
Which is a book I didn't get to name because it has this really long name that no one understands what anyone is talking about when they say it. But that was a 5-issue series that I wrote for artist Pete Woods, who's incredible. And it was the first time I had ever written full scripts because I don't write full scripts for my own comics that I illustrate. So doing that gave me a lot of confidence that I could actually write pretty okay for other people.
Right.
So that was a big project for me to like gain the confidence to be able to do this book the way it's been done.
Mm-hmm. I want to go back to Count Stockula very briefly because I feel like people always kind of gravitate towards like the super weird characters. Like, have you ever read any of John Allison's stuff? He did like Bad Machinery and Giant Days, and like his stuff. He did a webcomic called Bad Machinery, and one of my favorite characters in it was this character named Bobby Swaps, who is like this high school kid who sells stuff in his like trench coat. Like he's this like dude who just sells random stuff, and he like literally appeared in like 2 comics over the period of like 7 years. And like I did a podcast with John, and I was like, hey, when's Bobby Swaps coming back? And he's like, whoa, I haven't thought about that guy in like 6 years. It's funny how like people gravitate towards those types of characters. I think there's just like these oddballs that like you're like, I just want to know what Count Stockula is doing. Like that's something I want.
Yeah, it's weird, and I'm sure he's the same way about his character, that he doesn't really have anything planned,
Right.
For me, most of my characters are based off of some other character that already exists, like either like
Gnarled Winslow.
Yeah, like attitude wise, it's usually attitude wise that I base my characters attitude wise off of an actor in a role that I've seen or another specific character, and that gets me in the mindset to be able to write in their voice and like know what actions they would make in certain scenes because I know what that actor in that movie I've seen a million times do. But so like I'm sure with him as well, it's just like there wasn't much thought. It was just a throwaway joke or what have you, or he's based on a character actor in some movie that isn't important, So I had to kind of figure out who Count Stockula was, and I just basically used him as a vehicle for stories that happen around him, because he's just kind of like a simple little, I guess, teenager maybe. I don't know. So like all this bad stuff happens to him in the book around him, and then hopefully at the end it seems like he gets some sort of happiness at the end. But again, like it was just like, boy, like that's not the character I want to write, but I'll figure it out, and it ended up pretty good.
Nice, that's awesome. So I want to talk about all the artists on this project, but first I have to ask. I read Paolo Rivera's write up for the Kickstarter going live and everything. You guys were roommates in college?
Yeah,
that's awesome.
Yeah, it was good. Yeah, I mean, Paolo is a talent of a generation. Like it was interesting being in college because Paolo and I were roommates for a year that we studied in Italy, and we both took courses with David Mazzucchelli, and Paolo and Joe Quinones as well was in our class. So the three of us were like the big comic guys in our class, and it was interesting to see that Paula was working for Marvel in our senior year and was like getting college credit for doing painting covers for Marvel as like some sort of independent study thing. And so that, that led me to think that I'd probably be working at some point in professional comics after that. And then I didn't for a very, 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 very long time. Um, but yeah, I didn't realize just how great Paulo was at that time. He just was kind of, he was the star of the illustration department, like a pretty known guy because of how incredibly good he is. But yeah, we were roommates for a year.
I do think that something you don't see it from him very often, but if you look like at his cover for Shirtless Bear Fighter, he did.
Oh man, it's so good.
It's so good, and he is like really funny, and like I feel like he can be with his art, and like that's one of the things I'm really excited about is like you have people like, obviously Rob Guillory or like Xander Cannon are going to be able to do very comedic things. Like that's something we know is in their wheelhouse, but I don't really feel like we've seen that from people like James Herron or Greg Smallwood or Chris Burnham. Maybe a little bit on Herron because Rumble was pretty funny at times.
Yeah, Rumble's got some humor in it.
Yeah, but I mean, like Smallwood and Burnham, I imagine that was probably pretty enjoyable for them to stretch their legs in ways that they don't normally get to do.
Yeah, and I think that's why everyone turned in such good work. It's usually like a thing if you ask someone to help you out that is, above your weight class, how often do you get their full max effort, and I got really lucky that everyone, really brought their A game for this. But most people that work in comics are funny.
Yeah.
And it gets beaten into us that comics aren't supposed to be funny. Trad Moore is another person that anytime he draws comedy, it's incredible how good he is and how funny it is. But he doesn't really do that very often. Paul's the same way. Paulo is super, super, super smart. One of the smartest people I've ever met. And he turned in 4 pages that had almost per panel 1 joke added visually that I didn't have in the script. They're incredible. Like I could not believe how smart a lot of the stuff was that he was putting in there. And it's just like, man, I wish I could write for this person all the time, but obviously that's not going to happen. But it was like, oh my gosh, like that's so good. And like Greg Smallwood's story it's probably my second favorite in the entire book. Like it's really, really funny. And Greg Smallwood is used to drawing, people with guns hiding in the shadows, So, and then, James Herron is crazy like that. Those pages, everything is moving at all times. Like the amount of motion he draws in those pages is nuts. And the reactions and the, I have this, my one big rule in the comedy that I do is that no matter what happens, everyone takes it very, very seriously. So, if you don't understand that and you don't get that from like an artist standpoint and you make things like silly and goofy, like my humor plays so much better when everyone thinks this is like a really big, scary, horrible thing, instead of like, look at how ridiculous this all is. And everyone got that, like everyone played right to that tone. And it's awesome.
This ties very closely to a theory I have. Like my friend and I, one of our favorite things to do is have bad movie nights where we watch like just completely absurd movies and just kind of laugh along with them. Yeah. But like there's like a very specific rule that we have. It's like people are like, how do you know which movies to watch? I'm like, you have to make sure that the movie is a movie that takes itself seriously, because if it doesn't, it devalues the entire experience. If it's actively trying to be a bad movie that's so bad it's good, it's not going to work. It's like trying too hard. And it's like, it sounds like it's kind of the same thing for God Hates Astronauts.
Yeah, I mean, it's, with the bad movie stuff, like I've seen so many bad movies that are intentionally trying to be good, or at least trying to make money, in a way
Right.
of like, I'm going to make this horror movie and I'm going to show boobs and someone getting killed and, have my effects, but I'm going to, like, this is not supposed to be funny. And when that stuff is off and there's like there's that Miami Connection room sweet spot that those movies are just incredible. And I always wonder if it's mean in any way or mean spirited in any way to want to watch these things because I think they're so bad.
Right.
Like I don't know.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm actually kind of like we've our two holy grails that my friend and I were going to watch was we watched the Room together finally, and we haven't watched Miami Connection. That's the other big one. But like,
oh, yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it's like Sleepaway Camp was one of our all-time favorite ones we
Oh, I
watched.
love that movie. But that movie's not just bad. That movie is fascinating.
It
'cause
is.
the mind behind it, like the danger of with children and the swearing and like
Like
that movie's great.
it has one of the all-time greatest innings of any movie I've
Hmm.
ever seen in my entire life. Like if you ever meet somebody and you just like cross your legs and just start going at them.
Do you know how they made that ending?
No.
That was a college kid that they got drunk
Wait, which
and
one?
they put
What, the girl?
yep, and they put a mask on him. It's a mask.
Oh my God.
Yep.
That's
And they I'm trying to remember. It says they talk about it on one of the commentaries, but they went and found some college dudes and they found the smallest one and they got him drunk and they made him put the mask on and stand on the beach.
oh my God, that's incredible.
Which is really amazing.
I have to say the sequels didn't live up to it. And although it did star, I'm trying to remember who it was. It was like some famous
I think
person.
is it Springsteen's
It
daughter?
is. I think it is
Something
Springsteen's
like that.
daughter. Yeah.
Yeah.
And, another one I would highly recommend if you ever get a chance is Howling 3, The Marsupials, which is about marsupial
Oh,
werewolves.
I don't think I've ever seen that one.
It's really good. I mean, good relative. But yeah, I mean, there is kind of like a fine line where it's like sometimes like you're like, oh man, like they were actually serious about this. That's the interesting thing about The Room, I think, deep down, is like he was 100% serious about making that
Oh,
movie.
of course, yeah.
And so like him actually going to all of like the ones where they like laugh hysterically at it. There's kind of like I would feel really weird about being in a theater that he's at while watching the movie. I would feel very
Yeah.
awkward.
I did that.
Oh,
And,
did you?
Yeah, so I got to meet him, and why can't I think of his name?
Oh my God, I can't believe I'm forgetting his name too.
Mark. The actor who plays Mark.
You met Mark. Okay.
Yeah, I met Mark. I can't believe I can't think of his name. That's crazy.
You mean the main actor, or it's Tommy Wiseau?
Well, Tommy Wiseau, and I can't believe I can't think of Mark's name.
I can't believe he's not one of the first people that shows up on the Google search for it. That's ridiculous. He's even the guy who wrote the book.
Yeah, he wrote the book. Yeah. I met him, and he had the most delicate handshake that I've ever shook. And then Tommy Wiseau's hand looked like you were shaking a lobster. It was like this giant, homunculus. Like, that guy was so weird to meet.
Greg Sestero.
Greg Sestero, yeah, of course. But yeah, he was there for it, and like he totally embraced it. And he says it's a dark comedy, and he's riding the wave.
Yeah, hell yeah. All right, so let's go back to God Hates Astronauts because I could talk about bad movies for the rest of my life. It's a great passion of mine. I want to do.
Before we do you know about Neil Breen?
No.
Okay, that's my recommendation for you. Fateful Findings by Neil Breen is one of my new favorite bad movies.
I need to check it out.
He is definitely channeling a little the Birdemic guy and a little Tommy Wiseau. So it's really great.
Where do you stand on U-Bowl?
I have seen some of his movies.
Some of them are really Blood Rain was a good one. Blood Rain was a good one, especially because Ben Kingsley, I'm pretty sure, had in his contract that he cannot be in scenes that are in anything besides one room. And so the entire movie. Yeah, he's like on a throne for like the entire movie. But all right, so I want to do some quick rapid fire questions about the book itself, about the 3D Spectacular. This is gonna be super random. I just have to say, when I first saw 3D Cowboys tattoo on the cover, I forgot about LeBronson and I read it as "Die LeBron's son die," and I was like, my thought initially became, why does Ryan hate LeBron James's family so much?
Mhm.
Has anyone ever made that mistake, or am I the only person who read that in all caps?
No, I sort of regret him having that tattoo because it is so incongruous if you haven't read God Hates Astronauts.
Hmm.
So yeah, I don't know, but yeah, there's a character named Charles LeBronson
Right.
who's a basketball playing Charles Bronson detective
Hmm.
in the book. So yeah, I don't know. It's really strange that it's kind of out there on the cover. I've been thinking about removing it from the actual cover because it's just confusing to people. So yeah, I don't
I'm
know.
sorry I brought up a sore subject. I just thought it
Oh
was
no, not
funny.
at all, not at all. It's good to
Um,
think about.
next question. What is the like? You have all these insane names, and there are insane names and curse words too, which I imagine you were a part of.
Mhm.
What is the origin of the name Wayne Jetski? I mean, is it Wayne Gretzky basically?
Yeah, it is.
Oh,
Yeah, he's a hockey playing robot that transforms into a jet ski.
why is he not the
So
main character?
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I have this list on my phone of all these characters I'll never use because they're all these stupid one-off joke pun-based names, and Wayne Jetski was one of them.
Hmm.
And
Kind of like
I don't
Count
know. I was
Stockula.
just yeah, like Count Stockula. Yeah. So I just like you know what? Let's see what happens. I've always wanted to use Harmonica Lewinsky,
Ooh, that's
but
good.
I don't know who that character is. And again, like I have this huge list on my phone of all these characters that I could, or I'll just never use, you know?
I love that. That is like that's like precious intellectual property for you. It's like people can't get a hold of that because otherwise they're gonna have all the most absurd names to use in their
Yeah,
own stuff.
all my best ideas.
That is kind of funny. I always send myself emails for like good ideas, and I love that you have like this notepad effectively just like on your phone filled with like these names. It's incredible.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, uh, it is very helpful. And then like sometimes I will find ways to throw in throwaway names. Like, I, I had one name, that was Shoeless George Jetson.
Ooh, that's really good.
Yeah, and so then I just named a background character gets referred to as being named Shoeless George Jetson in the book. Uh, but I do like the idea of like a futuristic old timey baseball player. But you know,
I do like the blend of that because it like totally fits with the rhythm of Joe Jackson.
yeah.
It's very nice. All right, so next question I want to ask about 3D Millennial. The story is largely built around him and his like amazing hair. I have to ask, does he order avocado toast in the prison commissary, and does that make him unable to afford a house?
Well, he still lives at home
Okay,
in the
okay.
story, but you know, it really so much of it. My favorite part of 3D Millennial is that in his story, he has no when he tells a story to his dad, he has no ability to not speak in his own voice.
Mm.
So he just says like
Oh.
and and dude and for every single character, and it like I don't know how well that will read. But to me, when I'm reading the script, it makes me laugh because you know there's female characters and then male characters, and they're all just talking like 3D millennial talks.
That's awesome. So I don't want to spoil it. I don't even know if this counts as a spoiler, but who draws the 3D Millennial story?
Joe Quinones.
Nice. That's very good.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's weird. Like in the script, I write like I know this goes against everything we've learned, but you have to try and make this be broken and not make sense. Visually tell this story as poorly as possible.
I feel like, I mean, this is no slander to Chip Zdarsky, but I feel like Howard the Duck was just like nonsensical enough where it makes sense that Joe would be able to do something like that.
Sure.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, Howard the Duck makes sense, but at the same time, it doesn't make sense. I feel like in the same way that it hates astronauts works. So last quick question about this stuff. There's a page. One of the pages you shared from Paolo Rivera was there's like a prison gangster T Rex that looks like Rex from Toy Story standing behind an armless gnarled Winslow. That I don't know what it is about that, but that is like the greatest thing I've seen in a comic in an extremely long time. Is that the greatest thing in the book, or is that elsewhere in the book?
You know, I think it's pretty fantastic. Like there are four dinosaurs in Paulo's story. Um, and I just wrote just go crazy and have fun with them
Yeah.
and just make them up. So that whole Toy Story thing is all him.
Nice.
And then later the big boss dinosaur that's in charge of the gang, he drew to look like Bebop, like he's wearing like a costume like Bebop from TMNT. So yeah, I don't know. There's goofs throughout. Like I don't really have a favorite at this point. It's
Sure.
usually like a subtle thing.
Yeah.
But some of the cartooning that's come in, it's just so damn good.
That's what I
I
think
got a
is
really good Fist of the North Star reference that
nice.
I'm really happy with because why not?
That's what I think is so cool about this is like they can it's like once you give them the script, you're going to have all these guys who don't necessarily normally get to do these things just come up with their own like, man, what do I do if I get the opportunity to be insane for a second? Like I love Robert Wilson the Fourth's page where what is Starfighter's name when he's got the cow head? Does he have a new, he has a
Stargrass.
yeah, Stargrass, yeah. Like Stargrass is like punching somebody in half and like
Yeah.
that's like incredible. And you don't get to see Robert do things like that, which is I mean, amazing.
Yeah, when I asked him, he said, he said I don't usually do weird things. I don't usually do comedy. Um, can you make it just totally outside of what I normally do?
Yeah.
And I said, absolutely. And then I wrote him a whole script. And he said, this makes me uncomfortable. It's a little too weird. So then I had to write him a new script because I really went crazy on it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
All right, so I want to talk about some of the rewards because I think they're amazing. You have special editions. There is like, for example, there's the Thunderdome edition, which I really want to get, which features all of the the special manipulations you do to it, which can include the Hipster Dude special edition, where you draw facial hair on everyone. The Your Book Is My Wife, where you sleep with I mean, not like sleep in that way, but like you take you take pictures with them in your bed, and et cetera, et cetera. You have a relationship, and then of course the Secret Mistress. Can't forget the Secret Mistress,
Oh
where
yeah.
you're cheating on your wife with the other book. Like these are additional books you can get where you do these special editions for it. Where did that come from? Like, I love it. It's funny. Like, I desperately want to back at one of those levels, and I will back at one of those levels. But I love that you did that. Why was that a thing you wanted to do?
Well, like when I put the structure of the Kickstarter together, I realized it was decently humorless.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I had to like figure out a way to have things that people would get excited about, like would talk about, would think were funny, that they would want to share. And damaging my own book is kind of funny in general. So I just kind of thought about, I've got so many of them. Like if any of these ever sold out, which they won't, I could add a bunch more. But then I started like thinking about like the stuff like Your Book Is My Wife edition, like things that people probably won't back, but that's fine. Like I don't need anyone to back it. It's just like it's a conversation piece, like to make it as ridiculous as possible.
Well, and I feel like those ones are the types of things that people will share just because like this is ridiculous, and then it kind of does advertising for you.
Yeah, but I will do all those things.
Yeah.
Like I had to think long and hard about every single one to make sure like, yeah, this would be worth my time and this would be weird and this will work in some way. Like like I have the wrapped in plastic edition, which is basically a huge Twin Peaks reference, where I wrap your book in plastic and put leaves and yarn, yellow yarn in the plastic, and then my wife's family lives near a creek, so I'm just gonna like float it down the creek. and then discover it on the rocky beach, and take a photo of it, like it was Laura Palmer from Twin Peaks. So, I don't know, it's kind of funny, ridiculous stuff, but I don't know, like I like having that in the Kickstarter.
Did you have to bake into your schedule just in case everyone did back at the Your Book Is My Wife and Secret Mistress levels that you'd have to sleep with each of these books, so you have to put that into your schedule? It's like, oh, now I'm 50 days out.
Yeah, I put those are back. Those are being fulfilled a little bit later, because I will have to find a night to sleep with the book. Uh, so yeah, I thought about it. I've tried to be really really think all this stuff out, which is hard.
I'm kind of surprised you don't have like a Simon edition where you just give your cat Simon the book for like a week, and then like
Yeah,
whatever happens happens.
yeah. No, I thought about that. I thought about serving his food on your book.
Ooh,
You know,
that's good.
I don't know. I might add that. I still am probably going to add some backer levels, because it did much better than I thought it would in the first couple hours. So things were selling out, and so yeah, I don't know. I got some other ideas.
I mean, it launched yesterday, and you're like what 700, 600 off, 600 off. Yeah, I mean that's
Yeah,
or 2 days ago, I guess it launched. But
yeah. It's been 2 days. Yeah, yeah. I don't like Kickstarters are a weird thing. They do incredibly like you get like 40 to 45% of your backers on your first day.
yeah,
So like if my first day was every single day of the 30 days, I would buy a boat or something, but at this point, like the curve is like super steep and then it flattens out. And then the last like 2 days, it gets a little bit more popular and will go up a little bit. But I'm asking for 30 grand, and all of that is the manufacturing of the book
right.
without me making a dime,
Hmm.
So paying all my artists, paying my colorists, paying my letterer, covering my shipping costs, covering all my printing costs, covering the chunk that Kickstarter takes, like, a lot goes into figuring out exactly how much money I actually need so I don't lose my shirt on this.
Hmm.
Um, so like it's an interesting thing. Like I'm really close to hitting my goal and I'm very excited about it, but also it just means I make my book, which is why I'm here and why I'm doing it.
Right.
But people talk to me like I'm rich, like that's my money. It's like no, 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 that is money for the book. Like that's what that money is.
Yeah. I mean, like it's did you see there was Jim Demonakos did a Kickstarter that launched today for like spinner racks? Did you see that?
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah,
Yeah, so it's always nice when you see like the breakdown of exactly where the money is going, but like you
yeah,
never see like in that pie chart like this is going to my bank account. Like
yeah. Where's
because
Jim's money? Yeah.
yeah, because that's not how it is. That's not how these work. But I do have to ask like what I do a very small level version of your thing where I run a Patreon for my podcast and for my writing and
Mhm.
everything like that. And like I always feel like there's this like weird trepidation I have about like promoting it. Like I feel really
Yeah, it's
weird and
weird.
yeah,
Yeah.
and it's like you don't want to constantly be saying something, but at the same time you kind of have to be. What are the feelings like during a Kickstarter? Like the stress and like the nervousness. Like, is that something you kind of have diminished a bit because you've done this a few times, or is it still very present?
No, this has been awful. I mean, honestly, like, yeah, I mean, so much work went into this. There was so much risk on my part, that, like, I just running through all the things in my head, of what could have happened on that first day. It raised like 20, I don't know, 24, 25 on the first day, which is amazing.
Hmm.
But it could have raised like $6,000, like that first day is your money, that tells you what you're going to do the whole rest of the time. Um, so it was incredibly like those first couple hours were so like blood pumping, high intensity. Just like I like just scrambling around to make sure I was contacting everyone and I had the website working, like all the links working and all that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
Just because like this is it. Like if it doesn't hit here, then it's never gonna hit. So, um, and then after it hits, it's like, all right, well, when is it gonna start slowing down? And watching it start to slow down, and like today's the third day, and it was like a slow crawl,
Hmm.
um, and we're like right at the goal, and it's just like, man, like I know how good all the art that's being turned in, and I just want to figure out a way for people to know about it.
Right.
But I know that there's tons of people that are like, all right, I already backed it. I've already heard of this. Like, I don't need to see you tweeting about this. I don't need more interference in my life from this because I'm already involved. So
it's a
there
fine
is a
line.
little bit of, it's really weird. And there's also this weird perception of people that Kickstarter is some sort of charity,
Right.
right? Like it's not a GoFundMe. It's not it's not a thing that I'm asking you for money because I need money.
Right.
It is a thing of, if you buy this book ahead of time, then I can spend that money directly towards getting it made. And that's it. So it's a pre-order system. It's the same way that like you would pre-order, something on Amazon or what have you. But there's still that weird perception that, oh, he wants money from me again. It's like, no, I don't want money from you. I want you to buy my book. Like, I want you to read this because I think it's good. And if you're not interested, you're not interested. But I'm not asking you to help. Like, I'm not asking you to bail me out.
Right.
And it's the perception is so strange. It's just people being like, "Oh, I backed his other Kickstarter." It's like, but if the book was on Amazon, you wouldn't have that same
mentality,
right? Like, if the book was on Amazon and I sold it to you on Amazon, I'd make $1.
Right.
If the book is on Kickstarter and I sold it to you on Kickstarter, then I make, $12 that goes straight towards paying artists that worked on the book and for printing the book. So to me, but you can't expect people to know that because they haven't done it themselves.
Right. It's such an interesting thing because there's like a lot of nuance to how all of it works. I mean, a lot of it's pretty straightforward. It's like you're investing, like you said, you're effectively, it's a pre-order process effectively. But at the same time, it's like, the world we live in today is not a world filled with nuance. And it's like, a lot of people don't care to know. Like the idea that like, oh, he's trying to get my money again. I'm like, no, you're trying to get money for a separate project that is unrelated to Blast Furnace and like the God Hates Astronauts hardcover and everything. And it is very interesting. It's that's one of the things that I think is really interesting about Kickstarter is like, we talked about it before about how like people don't really forget. Like the internet never forgets, and that can stand to like negative behavior, and it can even stand to like, oh, you're doing another Kickstarter, why is that a thing that's happening? It's very fascinating.
It is. Like, it's stuff that I think about a lot, and I don't think there's any way that you're really gonna convince people that it is just like you were buying a book in a store. You just get it a couple months later. And I don't know how that's ever going to go away. And the Kickstarter has that same thing. As I said earlier, it's like, boy, like, what are you going to do with all your money that you made? It's like, no, I didn't make any money. Like, right. I made a book. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to make a book.
You're not going to buy the Detroit Tigers?
Nope.
I don't even know if you could get season tickets for that. I bet you could.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, yeah. I'm waiting, and I'm sure it's happened. I'm sure there's been some person that's had some sort of tech thing and made $100,000 and then just fled the country.
There was a dude, I think it was like 6 years ago or something like that, who like legit burned his money. Legit burned it.
Yeah, that's wild.
Yeah, I mean, like, in that you have those bad actors who reflect poorly on the community. But, well, last question on the God Hates Astronauts front. We talked about this in Emerald City. I love the fact that you remixed an issue of God Hates Astronauts that was already completed and just rescripted and relettered it with Goats Eat Castanets, which you sell at cons. I think that's genius, but, like, why was that something you wanted to do? And was that, like, a bit more arduous than people would really expect?
No, that was super easy.
Was it?
Yeah, it was. That was when I was working. Like, after God Hates Astronauts, I spent a year just doing work for hire,
right,
to see if that was easier and more stress free, and it certainly was. But I went to the Baltimore Comic-Con and I sat there and I spent all weekend there, and I didn't make any money. Because all I was doing was signing stacks of books for people. And New York Comic Con was like 3 weeks away. And so on the flight home, I sat there and brainstormed. It's like, I need to make something new and fun, because I've spent a year not making anything fun. It's just doing work for hire jobs. So I don't have time to draw comics. So I just took a comic I'd already drawn, and I spent 2 days and I re-lettered the whole thing to be about something else. And then I self-published it and got it the day before I went to New York Comic Con, and then went and debuted it there as a brand new comic. And it did really, really well, and people seem to really like it. So, it was, again, I did exactly what I wanted to do for a year working on God Hates Astronauts, and it was really not great. And so then I went to trying to do things to make other people happy, and that was not great. And so then I kind of went into the curse words territory, which, again, I started drawing curse words in March of 2016, and issue 1 came out in January of 2017. So that's just like the slow cycle of comics,
right?
But yeah, so that's what that was. That was, again, a total reaction to having not done anything very fun for a year.
Well, and like one thing I noticed from Emerald City this year is like I was sitting with a creator at their table for a while, and like there was a person who came up to their table and literally just asked them, "Do you have anything new this year?" And it's kind of interesting because it's like I think that's part of the reason why there's been such an advent of like enamel pins and like the print economy. Is like that's going through the roof, and it's because like it's relatively easy to do. It doesn't cost a ton, and you can produce a lot of it. And like that's super valuable. Like having something you can offer people when they come up to your table is like huge. And I Goats Eats Castanets was one of the most original things I saw in terms of like, which is funny because it's like a remix issue, but at the same time, like I've never seen somebody do that before.
Yeah, it kind of reads like you're watching a dubbed movie, where the actors don't know what's going on and they're just kind of making conversation.
Yeah.
So.
All right, so I just have a couple questions about curse words before we jump into 5 questions about Ryan Browne, the person. I did want to ask about your partnership with Charles Soule, because you talked about how you guys got together. But the funny thing is I always, in my mind, I had like my headcanon about Charles, and that he was like a serious dude. And it was because I read his comics before, and because he was a lawyer and everything like that. But, I mean, curse words is hilarious. Like, how did you guys, like, what was it about Charles that made him somebody you wanted to work with? And, like, how do you feel the two of you bring the best out of each other?
Well, I met Charles quite a while ago. His wife is actually from my hometown.
Oh.
And we kind of stumbled upon that at a bar at a comic show, because the Detroit Tigers were in the playoffs at the time, and I was really into it. So we started talking about Detroit, and then we kind of figured that out. So that's how we initially became friends. It was when he had his book Strongman out, but it was before he worked for Marvel or DC. And so we spent years we'd meet up at Christmas when we were both kind of in Michigan and at comic shows, and we would just have tons of fun riffing on things.
Yeah.
We made this reoccurring, ongoing chat about our never made Stiltman comic.
Oh my God, yes.
That we've riffed on. We've come up with tons of great ideas for Stiltman, to the point where he actually pitched it to Marvel when he started working for Marvel, as like something that we would do, and they said no.
The funny thing is like he made a comment, I think, at some point, like talking about like creators or characters that people love. And like, you're like, ooh, who's like a D-list character you love? And I was like, Stiltman, and he like immediately liked it. And now I'm like, oh, I feel like he probably likes Stiltman too.
Oh yeah, we're all in on Stiltman.
It's amazing.
Yeah. So we have a very similar sense of humor, and again, he's one of those people that most of the books he does are very serious, but he's a very funny person in real life. So this was finally like, let's do this. Like, let's
get weird.
Because but yeah, because like the original thing that he pitched to me for us to draw, um, or for us to work on, was Detroit based. So in that it was kind of interesting to me, but it was really heady and had a lot to do with finances
Mm,
and politics. And uh, I did. Uh, I did a 6-page preview that we showed to Eric Stevenson and Image, and honestly, thankfully, uh, he thought it was too similar to a book that they were already working on, so he rejected it. And then it became, well, what do we want to do? Like, what would I want to do? What would he want to do that could be fun?
mm-hmm.
So that's where Chris Words came out of. So we started with, he had this idea for making a book about a wizard who's a dick. Um, and we're sitting at a comic show, and so I started thinking about it, and that's when I like drew Wizard straight out. Like that was the first drawing I did, was
Amazing.
a wizard with sunglasses, a long white beard, and like brown cool guy hair.
Mm-hmm.
And we're like, all right, that's our starting point. And then we started riffing back and forth about, like all these funny ways that he could use his magic to be a dick to entertain himself. Like he's
Mm-hmm.
all powerful, but he just kind of wants to entertain himself. And so then I drew him with a koala, and I was like, it would be fun if he'd have a familiar because I want to draw animals. And he was like, very hesitant for Wizard, to have my like silly animal stuff. But then he figured out that who Margaret was,
Right.
and that was like, all right. And that was like the moment where it's like, all right, I think we got something
Yeah.
here. And
Yeah.
then Charles and I bounced things back and forth, and then he'd take them and develop them and write them. So like the core concepts was like a back and forth, like the similar to like our Stiltman book that hopefully one day will happen, just like us spitballing and bouncing things off each other and making each other laugh. So that's where the core mechanics of Curse Words came. And then Charles is so good at planning and having emotional resonance and having like really clear motivations for characters. So Charles really fleshed it out and made them into real people. And so it could have some silly Ryan Browne stuff, but it didn't. It wasn't unpitchable, and it didn't. It wasn't something that was hard to describe.
Mm-hmm.
So in a way, I think that book is unlike any other book that's out there. Like whether you like it or you don't like it, it's very unique because the combination of our sensibilities is I think very visible.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing is too outlandish and pushing the line like I like to do, and nothing is too serious like a lot of Charles's writing has been. So so I think it worked out pretty well.
I feel like, I mean, it's not one for one, obviously, but I feel like it kind of mines similar territory in a way from like the feeling standpoint of like Kaiju Max, which is one of my favorite
Yeah.
comics. In that it's like it's funny, but then you're like, damn, this is like surprisingly emotional. Like when the Margaret reveal, I remember getting that and I was like, that I did not see coming. It was like a hit. It was big.
It's awesome. I'm glad. Yeah.
Yeah, and it is really interesting. Like, this is obviously not speaking negatively of any of your other work or any of Charles's other work, but I feel like you guys kind of bring the best out of each other in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I
And
think so.
it's a really great collaboration. Although I have to admit, part of me figured you guys just paired up because you realize you're both the most productive people in your respective jobs.
Well, that is one thing. Like we both come down to the thought of like, boy, this is the most reliable person I've ever worked with.
Yeah.
Like, especially in comics, you're just so used to people that blow deadlines and aren't communicating. And it's like, I can always trust Charles is going to do what he says he's going to do, and vice versa. So that's really made it work pretty seamlessly. Did you know that I was the original artist on Kaiju Max?
I did know that. Xander told me at Emerald City a couple years ago.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean that's I was actually going to ask you about it as one of my 5 questions, but I decided like audible here, but because I remembered that because you had, and that's one of the things I really love in like the pages, like subtle little details for God Hates Astronauts. Electrogore is in the back of one of the panels in the
Absolutely.
prison.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Kaiju Max is my favorite comic. I love it, and like
Oh,
that's
it is the best comic. Yep.
it's so
Yep.
good. That basically my question was gonna be like, why is Kaiju Max the best? because
Because
I've
I'm not drawing it. Because Xander's drawing it.
well, and like that is one parallel that I was thinking about too when you were talking about how much weight that puts on you when you're doing God Hates Astronauts is like, those 10 issues by yourself. Like Xander's doing the same thing. He's doing everything. He's even lettering that book.
I know.
And like that's, I mean, it's a heavy book with like a lot of hilarious things in it. And like I think it's an astonishing accomplishment, and like I wish that book got more love. But
Me too. Yeah.
so the last thing I want to talk about with curse words is whose idea was the van tour?
Charles.
Okay.
That's his idea. Yeah. He is a musician who never got to go on tour and really wanted to do it. I had very little interest. So but it worked great. Like it was crazy good.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe how well it turned out.
I think that the surprising nature of the van tour itself makes it much more appealing. And I don't know, I love it. Actually, true last question. Are the Tigers because of the Detroit Tigers?
Absolutely.
Oh my God, yes. That is totally a thing I had in my head, and I was like, it's got to be that. It's got to be that.
Yeah, and I mean, you see in issue 11, their leader is named the Overlander.
Oh, I haven't read that one yet because I'm reading it in trade. But
yeah,
that's
yeah,
awesome.
Their leader is the Overlander, and he's the deep descendant of Justin Verlander. So.
All right. So to close, we're going to finish with 5 questions about Ryan Browne, the person. This is a perfect transition because we're going to talk about baseball really quick. You're a big Detroit Tigers fan, but they're in a bit of a rebuilding phase. Still, baseball's back. I saw your pictures where you have like 1 million screens going. What are you, even though your team is kind of in a weird place, what are you most excited about this season?
I'm excited about having a thing to follow every single day.
Oh.
Like that is one of the great things about baseball. It's a story that continues over the course of 6 months. And it's numbers and counting and stats that continue over 6 months, and it's history. And that is really fascinating to me. So I really like getting into that kind of stuff. Like watching the games and then talking to people about them, and then listening to podcasts, analyzing the weirdness that can happen, and the statistics that are historically significant. I think is very fascinating about baseball. Yeah, I don't know. It's like my favorite thing, and it's also something you can listen to on the radio while you're drawing.
Yeah.
And it's totally like the best thing that I could ever draw to,
I don't know why, but I find baseball to be so deeply fascinating on the radio versus every other sport, which I don't enjoy, like football or like basketball on radio. I'm just like, this is weird. Like it's too fast paced. It's like baseball. The pace is perfect.
It's the pace. Yeah. It's the pace. So baseball is a conversational sport. And so if you don't like the guys who are announcing the game, you're not going to like the experience, but it really is having someone tell you a story versus other sports where they can't possibly give you the information fast enough.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I love baseball on the radio. Like that's the only sport that I would prefer listening on the radio to watching.
Well, watching live though, baseball is incredible live. I love going to games.
Oh yeah.
So, the numbers thing is a big thing for me too, because like I grew up reading I live in Anchorage, Alaska, and like the Anchorage Times, which is no longer even a paper, had like the best sports section. I loved going through the box scores and figuring everything out. And it's like that's one of the things. Like I know a lot of people are not like into analytics and whatnot, but I love the expansion of all the analytics and the metrics and everything like that, because if you go through the numbers for baseball, I feel like you can understand a season more than you can with any other sport. It's like there's a logic and there's a lot of rhyme and reason to it, and it's really fascinating.
Yeah, there's that one-on-one component.
Yeah.
That other sports don't really have. You can just flat out say this player does this when his direct opponent does this. And you can analyze that, and you can compare that player against a different opponent,
right?
And the opponents he's had in the past. Whereas in football, you are comparing a ton of moving parts, and it's very complicated. And like you get the same thing like in pretty much every other sport. Like baseball is quite an outlier in this head-to-head matchup kind of thing.
Yeah.
You get that in tennis as well, that you get like this head-to-head matchup thing. But baseball, it's easier to understand the subtlety of baseball than it is the subtlety of tennis.
Mm-hmm. I really just watch Mariners games these days because I'm a huge Mariners fan.
Mm-hmm.
And the funny thing though is because of fantasy baseball and because I'm like obsessed with statistics and read like fan graphs all the time, I feel
Mm-hmm.
like I have a really great understanding of it in a way that I don't even on sports that I watch more of because I understand like how everything's working in the fabric of the stats and stuff. It's a fascinating sport. I love it. Um,
Yeah.
so next question, baseball related. Also, who is your favorite non-Tiger ever? And more importantly, who is your most hated baseball villain ever? Because I feel like people tying into the narrative element, I feel like people sleep on the fact that baseball has some incredible villains.
It does have some incredible villains.
I will say mine is Paul O'Neill because I hate Paul O'Neill.
Yeah, so you're talking about like people that I actually have like I can't stand.
Or it could be like inexplicable animosity, but yeah, like somebody you're just like when they come up to bat or they're pitching, you're just like screw this guy.
Yeah. The current one has got to be Yasiel Puig.
Oh,
But
it's a good one.
yeah, but Jorge Posada was always really irritating for some reason to me.
I feel like all of like the core four Yankees were like
Oh,
low key super
yeah.
annoying.
Jeter is pretty low, pretty high up there for someone, and his attitude in general, and his public perception, and now what he's done to the Marlins is he's pretty bad.
I do want to say he did give people who stayed the night with him or women who stayed the night with him gift bags when they left, which was very
Yes,
nice of
I've
him.
heard that too. Yeah.
Okay, favorite non-Tiger then.
Man, of all time.
You can just do this season if you'd prefer.
Well, I watch a lot of Cubs. They're my NL team.
Okay.
I've always had a fondness for Chris Bryant. Like he's my kind of player. I grew up playing third base, so I like third basemen. I've always liked Josh Donaldson as well.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of current players, I really, like I respond more to the grinder kind of player
Sure.
than the superstar home run dude.
Right.
So yeah, I don't know. I really appreciate players that play every day. So
Yeah.
um, yeah.
Okay, so next question, also vaguely baseball related. Speaking of Cubs, I saw your cat Simon wearing Cubs apparel. Would you be able to live with Simon if he was a White Sox fan?
Yeah, I think so. Because when I first moved to Chicago, the White Sox are in direct competition with the Tigers, so
Right.
I just hated them for years and years and years. And the older I get, the more I realize that a strong allegiance to a team name and uniform and history is kind of silly.
Right.
So I don't really take as much stock in that because I like baseball in general, and I think the White Sox are doing a really interesting rebuild. So I've started paying attention to their games more.
Did you read that article on The Ringer about the White Sox rebuild that was like earlier this week?
No, I didn't.
I should send you that article. It's really interesting because he talks about how he's like the guy who wrote it is a huge Kansas City Royals fan. And he talks about how he kind of grew to respect the White Sox after years of hating them because like how they were kind of just forgotten as like this championship team back in like I think it was 2006 they won the title and they
05.
oh five yeah and like they hadn't won a World Series in 88 years and like everyone was just like oh Cubs oh so and so
Yeah.
and it's just like they just got completely ignored and about how they kind of are this really interesting underdog who's went through this tanking. And now they have like people like Yuan Makata and they have like Michael Kopech coming up and all those people like that. And it's like, I don't know. It's kind of an incredible thing that they've done and people just completely ignored it. I'll send you the article. It's really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I am pretty fascinated by them. And I think that I'm really interested to see what they do with their players going forward. And like if Eloy Jimenez is great and, like there's a lot of interesting players coming up. And honestly, I go to a lot more White Sox games than any other team because they're so cheap. And I sit behind home plate, for $40 and it's awesome.
Yeah, that is awesome. I went to a Padres game when they were playing the Giants when the Giants were on an even year super good team, and the Padres were just the Padres and they were garbage, and it was like $7, and I was sitting on like first row, third base side, and it was amazing. Like that is kind of the nice thing about going to teams that aren't very good is the tickets are super
Oh
cheap.
yeah. Oh yeah.
So I want to ask a question about Simon. I told you before this that I am recently have acquired a kitten actually named Kubo. I have to get some advice from you. Like, what's your best advice on what I can expect from the cat life, or how I can achieve cat greatness? Because Simon is pretty amazing.
Simon's pretty amazing. Simon was touched by greatness very early on. He was a cat that was found in a garbage can. Like a kitten, a tiny kitten. He's very undersized and very crazy. We worked really hard to make him be calm, and it never took. So I don't know. I wrestle with him every morning. He jumps up on the bed, and I like flip him around and spin him around, and he attacks me. And yeah, we're at this point where he never hurts me, and he just like he lives for this kind of stimulation of wildness. And then he sprints around our apartment. So I don't know if I have much advice other than we've been very physical with him, and he has he used to attack us around it, and eventually he grew into being like into people and liking being around people. And I always think the worst thing about getting a cat is if it's a cat that just hides all day and just waits for its dinner, you know?
Yeah.
So so I don't know. We played with him a lot and messed with him a lot, and I think that helped him be more social.
Yeah, no, I mean that's very good advice. Our cat is like extremely social. Like we had a party shortly after getting him, and he was like, "All right, people," and it was way different. We got very lucky in like the random cat. He was a rescue, and we picked him up and everything. And he's just wonderful. I don't know. I immediately have become like a helicopter parent as soon as acquiring a cat, and we're not actual parents, and so it's like. This is like a very good precursor if we ever had kids. Like sure. I would just be a wreck. Like our cat is sick right now, and I'm like, I need to take time off from work because our cat is sick. All right, last question. I'm gonna audible back to bad movies. If you wanted to, if you were gonna give me a recommendation besides what was it, Ed Creen? What was the name of the
Neil Breen?
Neil Breen, yeah. What is your all-time favorite bad movie? And The Room is a very legitimate answer.
Yeah, I think The Room maybe I've seen the most. I love Miami Connection. I think it's a really heartfelt attempt at making this movie that went so wrong. Miami Connection is really a gem. And I love Roar a lot. Have you seen Roar?
Oh, Roar is that movie where they actually had like lions, like real lions, and they filmed a movie with them, right?
Yeah. It's Tippi Hedren and her actual family, and she was a big fan of big cats, and they lived with lions and tigers and jaguars and bobcats and what have you in like their Sherman Oaks home. Like they had them and they raised them, and they made this movie supposed to be about how great big cats are. And it's like this movie that was supposed to be for children, and it was supposed to help vilify poachers, and so that you would want to preserve these animals. So the bulk of it is shot in Los Angeles, and they made it over the course of, I think it was 11 years, maybe 14 years. And like over 60 people were severely injured on the set.
Yeah.
Because it is about a family living with lions, and it's like, a room full of 12 male lions, and people got really, really hurt. And so it took 11 years because people kept getting hurt. And it's like such an outrageously scary movie because of how intense all the animals are and the proximity to humans. And it tries to be silly in a little kid movie, but it's truly fascinating.
Yeah.
And so no one released it. It got released in Germany only. And then like 3 years ago, Alamo Drafthouse got the rights to it and put it out on Blu-ray, and it's up there for one of my. It's the best showing to a crowd movie that I have ever found.
I was desperate for. We have like this second run theater that has like it's like a draft house basically, Alamo Draft House, and they never brought Roar up, and I was so desperate for it because I read about it, and the fascinating thing about it is it like actually has kind of a pedigree. Like Jan de Bont was the cinematographer.
Yeah, he got scalped on it.
Yeah, like this is
He
the
had
dude
like
who made
70
Speed.
some stitches. He got at the top of his head ripped off.
Yeah, I mean it's like astonishing. It was like I remember reading the article, and I think my like jaw was dropped for like 75% of the article. It's astonishing. I need to read it, or watch it. But Ryan, that's all I have for you. Thank you so much. Best of luck with the Kickstarter, and I appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was super great. I love talking.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with artist Ryan Browne. You can find him on Twitter at Ryan Browne Art, on Tumblr at ryanbrowneart.tumblr.com, and his work in curse words at Image Comics, and in the current Kickstarter for God Hates Astronauts Presents 3D Cowboys 2D Spectacular. If you're a fan of the show, this is big news. Off Panel now has a Patreon. If you like the show and want to support it, consider backing it on Patreon at patreon.com/offpanel. There are fun rewards and insider information you can get if you do. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including David, Jason Nassy, Mike Gillis, Adam Bogert, Xavier Files, Maria Schweitzer, Matthew Taylor, Tyler Turner, Dan Guarino, Dan Lee, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Baraldi, Evan Blazer, Brian McRae, Ira James Udaskin, Benjamin Birdie, Henning Allers, Modern Magic Stories, Nick Hall, Bruna Batista, Abraham Reisman, Adrian Diaz, Bobby Angus, Bjorn Basin, Darren Neely, John Hendricks, Steve Anderson, Michael Perlman, Phil Nall, Ian Maxfield, Cliff Chang, Benjamin Shipper, Colin McMahon, Chris Palmer, Maxwell Schmidt, Scott McGovern, Nathan Fairbairn, Kat McKenzie, Lou Iovino, Christopher Carter, Nicholas Kesslake, Greg Rucka, Ryan Mail, Adam Highfield, Nicholas Gardner, Andrew Corrigan, Fiona Staples, Chris Morris, Chris O'Halloran, Mark Abbott, Mike Murphy, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim DeMonacos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics and Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. Don't forget to like the show on Facebook at /sketched, that's SKTCHD. Follow on Twitter at @sketchcomic, or follow me at @slicefriedgold. Want more from Off Panel? Subscribe at iTunes or Stitcher and give the show a rating or review while you're at it. A quick thanks to the band Wolfpack, whose excellent track Outro from the album Volmilch opens and closes the show now. Give them a listen as they're totally rad. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.